Well, welcome to the Personalization with Ninetale Bootcamp course, lesson number 9, AI, Chatbots, and Personalization, presented by Sebastian Muir, tech lead at Ninetale. If you want to learn more about him, just watch the interview in the introduction section of this course on headlesscreator.com. Having said that, let's go ahead and get Sebastian in. Sebastian, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this. It's all yours, sir.
Thank you. And yeah, let's jump straight in. And you might be wondering, AI, machine learning, chatbots, aren't these all just buzzwords? And I'm here to tell you, yes, they are, but they are for a good reason. And I'm here to tell you why you should actually care about AI in personalization. And for that, you need to remember one thing. Personalization is a maturity and a learning process. And we have in prior lessons for this introduced the maturity model for personalization, which is this pyramid, which goes from basic data collection all the way up to hyper personalization, where you have a one-to-one targeting of your content to an individual. And spoiler alert, at the very top, you can see it already says AI. That's where AI will really come into play. But you might be wondering, why do I even want to get to the top of this pyramid? Why do I need hyper-personalization? And the answer to this should be quite obvious, because the more targeted and personal your experience is, the more meaningful it is for the individual customer. And you will better understand their needs. And as always with personalization, you get more engagement, more conversions, and increase in revenue in the end. And this one-to-one personalization is really the first true personal experience, as the word suggests. It's an experience that a single person is having. So what role does AI play in all of this? First off, it's just a tool, as any other technique you might have learned in your tool belt. It basically can be used at any level of this maturity process. But at the very top, when you get into like micro-segmentation and the hyper-personalization phase, where it's basically necessary to use, because actually it's inherently scalable. That's one of its strengths. That means it will perform better the more data you have, as opposed to a lot of other fields where you might get swamped by data and actually everything slows down. Yes, training AI might be expensive in terms of money, time, labor, and yeah, just compute power actually. But in the end, most of the modern algorithms are quite fast, so they're all built to run in real time. And so in the end, your model doesn't care about if you have 1,000 or 1,000,000 users visiting your website. It will still personalize it for you. And now let's ask us, how is one-to-one personalization even possible? Do you now need to like write one blog post for every person visiting your blog? Do you really need to create a custom piece of content for every single customer? And of course, I'd say no. Let's just think about Netflix, and they're not producing one movie for every subscriber, even though I would kind of like that. But instead, they're just rearranging content. And that's where composability of content really plays into its strengths. That means, as you can see here, this is actually a screenshot from my Netflix homepage. I get personalized categories like action, sci-fi. Netflix knows that I'm into science fiction. They know what shows I've watched before and that there's new releases there of these shows. It's ordering the shows based on my behavior, because I don't think Star Trek is right now the hot new thing, but they know I'm a Trekkie, and I've actually recently looked back into this the next generation to recommend it to a friend. So they've adjusted their recommendation based on my recent behavior. And Netflix even goes one step further, and they personalize even the thumbnails they're showing to every single person. To be honest, on this example, I can't tell you why they're showing me these exact thumbnails, but actually Netflix has quite a great blog article where they go into details on how they're basically choosing which thumbnail to show to whom. And in the end, all these things together basically mean that the combinatorics will just lead to a unique homepage for every single visitor. Like, sure, you and me might have the same thumbnail for one show, or might have the one category in common, but having the exact same homepage is basically impossible. And that's how, by having composable content and recommendation in this case, can really lead to like a personal experience. So now that we've seen why AI is useful and how it can help you in achieving the personalization that you want, let's see how you can get started in adopting it.
Real quick question for you regarding composable content, because that's obviously something that I have many opinions on. Do we need to do anything different from a content modeling perspective when we take AI into consideration, or is just creating a good content model that supports structured content, and then AI will be able to harness that?
In general, all the same best practices still apply.
Okay.
There's not much you need to do specifically for AI in your content model. It's really just, yeah, already set up everything with composability in mind from the very beginning, and then you're good to go, because then you have ways of rearranging content and automating
Right.
actually this relayouting, and just don't create like one custom page every day of top 5 movies or whatever as your
Right.
content piece,
I'm
because
glad
then,
you said that. I'm really glad you said that because I think it's really important to emphasize that here, even though we're not talking about content modeling. But that affects obviously the possibility of using AI. Is don't think of your content as page driven. Think of your content as separate from pages, separate from device. It's omni-channel, right? That's really important. Otherwise, you can't get this thing to work.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. And so now let's dive into getting started with AI. First off, and before even step one, you need to have a personalization pipeline. So don't have AI be the first adventure into personalization for you. This should be, like I said, more of a maturing process. And once you have that, one thing I've seen time and time again, that people think of AI as some magic wand that you can wave around and then just solve all your business needs. But first, you really need to understand your use case. It's very important, because otherwise you can't even do step two, where we need to define success metrics. So what does success look like for AI in your personalization efforts? And then the end, you can start collecting additional data, building the models, and then all this stuff happens. But really, we will need to focus on the first few steps here. And what do I mean when I say you need to have a personalization pipeline? What I really mean is you need to have some sort of unified customer profile. We've talked about this in prior lessons, so if you want to know more about that, feel free to check those out. And yeah, you basically want, through all your digital touch points, know everything about your customer in one central place, so you can give the best personalization there. And you probably already should have some rule and behavior-based segments. We will see later how you can actually leverage those with AI. And also, you need a real-time delivery pipeline. That basically just means, what good would it do Netflix to know, hey, these are the movies that Sebastian wants to watch, if they have no way of in real time rearranging the content and showing it to me on the homepage? So all this should be set up, and then we can talk about AI. So now let's talk about the basically most important part, the different use cases that you might have. As I mentioned, AI can be applied as a tool at every level of your maturity process. So you can use it to identify who should I personalize for by using something like clustering. Then once you've identified your segments, you can use it to classify people, what segment or audience do they fall into. And then another one that we've seen now in the Netflix example was which products or content are most relevant for each customer. Then we have a recommender system for that. Or even, yeah, I want to fully auto-generate everything. Then we have generative systems for that. I will mostly now focus on the two in the middle, the classification and the recommender system, as I think they fit in a quite sweet spot where they're useful and sophisticated enough to bring a lot of value that you couldn't get otherwise, but they're not like science fiction like the last one, where you probably won't be able to achieve that in a reasonable amount of time. Yeah, and once you've identified your use case, it's time to define success metrics. And one thing is important. You need to have an objective of your AI system. That might be optimized click-through rate of my front page items. But that is usually just a proxy for some business value that you actually care about. Like, I want to increase average spend of my customers.